Well, welcome back. The Regulatory Blockbuster for quite a number of years has been the highlight, which surprises a lot of folks in the industry who have not had the pleasure of being here. And we appreciate the participants giving so generously of their time to share perspectives and hopefully have a little bit of fun as they share with you their views of the regulated industry. Our panel, once again, and I believe this is the 10th year that we've asked Greg O'Brien to moderate the panel. Greg has been a journalist for 25 years, and I guess for 13 years, is that right? 2005 is when he started Cartt.ca, which is the industry's news leader. And like I said, for 10 years, he's moderated this panel, and we appreciate him coming back to moderate once again. Ladies and gentlemen, the Regulatory Blockbuster.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to Mark and Michael for asking me to do this again. It's always fun, and I think I make the same joke every year that only in Canadian Telecom could the regulatory panel also be the blockbuster panel. But as every year, there's no shortage of topics to talk about. We're going to dispense, as we started a few years ago, with sort of opening statements or any PowerPoints or anything like that, and dive right into the issues. There are microphones out there. Please feel free to go up whenever you feel the need. Don't wait till the end. I will try and find you. If I don't see you, wave your arms, stamp your feet, and I'll turn to you when you're up at the mic. So this year's panel, my left here is from TELUS, Ted Woodhead, Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor. Next to Ted is Samer Bishay, who is President and CEO of Iristel and ICE Wireless. Next to Samer is Dave Watt, and Dave's title is right here. It's a Senior Vice President of Regulatory at Rogers Communications. Next to Dave is Andy Kaplan-Smith, Vice President of Regulatory and Carrier Affairs at TekSavvy. And down at the end is Rob Malcolmson, Senior Vice President, Regulatory Affairs at Bell Canada. So, top of the news today, we're going to skip over until a little bit later, which is the review of the Radio Communication Telecom Act and Broadcasting Act. We're going to loop back around to that, come back to it shortly, so don't worry about that. But when this conference launched in 2002, it was a hardcore telecom conference where TV was discussed barely at all. The world of entertainment and video was still pretty separate. YouTube was still 3 years away from launching. Now we're crossing the streams like crazy. It's all over the place. So let's go right into the report that came out last Thursday from the CRTC called Harnessing Change. There, the CRTC presented 4 options available to the federal government as they overhaul the Broadcasting Telecom Radio Communications Act. 1 is the status quo, change nothing. 2, deregulate all the existing players, or apply the existing regulatory approach to new players. And number 4, develop new, adaptable, and innovative approaches which engage new players. So we all know that, at least I think we all know, that the CRTC recommended number 4. And it proposed some solutions which, if enacted, would seriously impact all of your operations up here. It would make serious changes if they're implemented to how each of you do business in different ways. So I'm going to turn to the owners of no content first. So that's Samer, Ted, and Andy, and ask what your reactions were when you heard that the CRTC was thinking about a potential levy on ISPs to fund Canadian content.
I guess I can start. I have to actually admit that I was involved in the original new media report. I was the staff prime at the CRTC for that basically took a no regulatory approach to online services.
So the exemption order in 1999?
Yes, right. in 99, yes. And so coming from that mindset, I don't agree that you should be imposing taxes on one set of services versus another set of services that are directly in competition with each other. That said, I on the way up here, I noticed all of the sort of chaff around this issue on Twitter and Facebook and that sort of thing. And it's without, you had said you're going to put the review panel at the end or something, but there is a statement in the review panel mandate that says nothing that you should do as a result of this or propose should increase the cost of these services to consumers. So I kind of suspect this will find a middle ground. In terms of the CRTC's report, they were tasked with answering some questions from the government. You had mentioned about, are you the only lawyer on this thing? You know, it's the old lawyers thing. Don't ask questions that you don't know the answer to. So the CRTC was faced with these questions, and they came up with some answers as potential proposals. So, you know, do I agree with a lot of those proposals? No. But on the other hand, you know, you asked, it was answered.
Samer, what do you think?
I definitely think it's the elephant in the room right now because, you know, tax, I'm not sure why Netflix got away with not having a sales tax. I mean, as a telecommunications company, we operate in all the 10 provinces and the 3 territories. We have a 2 out of 3 rule that we always apply. Like per accounting structure, the 2 out of 3 rule is depending on the originator, the terminator of the call, and where the tower is, basically. And based on that metric, we could easily identify that Netflix should just have a sales tax, just like where the recipient or the billing address should be, and move on. I'm not sure why we're trying to regulate something that has already been done 100 years ago and impose tariffs on, you know, ISPs like us that are, you know, we're independent, we're trying to get a market share. Why can it not just be passed on? And obviously, you know, there's a lot of politics at play here because there's elections coming. Nobody wants to say there's going to be extra tax. Like it's probably the worst time this thing could pop up at, right? It should have just been done from the get-go when Netflix launched.
But we've had nothing but, you know, from the politicians, no Netflix tax. Mm-hmm. You want to talk about it? No Netflix tax. They'll talk right over you and just say no Netflix tax, no Netflix tax. You know, so that's been the extent of the conversation. But now there's you know, a lot more out there in this report and some sort of nuanced ideas as to the reasons why. But I know, Andy, you are opposition to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more of a nuanced idea about a reason why, but it's I think it ignores the reality of other players in the market. It focuses on vertically integrated companies, explicitly focuses on vertically integrated companies, a very, you know, a relatively small part of the use of the internet, maybe a large part of it in terms of bandwidth and maybe a growing part of it, but in terms of value of how people use the internet, it was kind of unrecognizable to me as the internet that we all work on. It describes the internet as a content delivery platform, which is, you know, not. There are certainly applications on the internet that are content delivery, but that's not the primary value of this communication system that we've all worked for years to build. Sorry, just to return to sort of the competitor's perspective here. You know, to the extent that you can take money from one pocket and put it in another, and overall it kind of ends up being more or less neutral, financially neutral. That might work for some vertically integrated monopolies, but it completely ignores the impact on the rest of the players.
So you don't see yourself as sort of the new style cable company where, you know, you're delivering video just like cable did in the 80s and 90s, and therefore you should pay part of your revenue towards media funds.
I think that's a high school debating topic.
Yeah.
These are not cable.
I was
companies.
on my high school debate team.
So was I. Samer said something that I thought was bang on. Like, if you really, rather than, like, it must be part of the Canadian psyche. Our first, you know, thing that we turn to is regulation every time there's some issue. If you wanted to actually fix this, as Samer said, whatever it was, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you would have forced the credit card companies and banks. There's the gatekeeper role to Netflix. Canadians have to pay them by credit card. and like just have the credit card companies apply the tax, change the legislation. You don't have to go through all of this charade of whatever it is we're doing, just to level the playing field between online video.
Or just go to Netflix themselves and have them. I mean, whenever you provide service, you have content that's coming to a Canadian. That's the rule. You want to get a license, that's the rule.
Well, and they've said if told by the government, they will collect it.
Yeah.
And it's beyond Netflix. It's like, I've even got a list here because I knew we were going this way. Just in my own personal life and business, there's no sales tax on Netflix, Google Drive, Dropbox, DAZN, CBS All Access, Google Music, and the LinkedIn and Facebook ads that I buy. None of that has any sales tax collected on it. Extrapolate that across the country, you're looking at that's a lot of money. I mean, yes, it comes out of Canadians' pockets, but eventually government is going to say, we need access to this money that we're missing.
Yeah, and the easiest way to do that, if that in fact is the case, then the easiest way to do that, rather than through, regulation under the Telecommunications Act or the Broadcasting Act, is to do what I just said, is go and make a change to the Bank Act or whatever statutory instrument that Visa and these companies operate under, and change and do it that way, and you fix it overnight.
Telecom executive says change Bank Act. Everyone got the headline so far?
Well, I disagree with Ted on that one specifically, but definitely, I mean, you got to control it at the source, not after it lands.
All right, so let's turn to the content owners as well as network owners. Bell and Rogers, you're vertically integrated, big content divisions, as well as big networking divisions, obviously. Where do you come down on sort of milking some ISP money to fund your Canadian content?
Well, I'll start first. So when we saw the report, we actually thought it was fairly forward-looking and pragmatic. The Commission recognizes that none of us can continue to pretend that there's a regulated ecosystem that supports Canadian content, and then there's this other parallel unregulated ecosystem which does something but maybe doesn't disseminate content. It does. The internet is a disseminator of video and audio, and if we believe in culture and we believe in the creation and promotion of Canadian content, the idea that the existing ecosystem, primarily BDUs, can continue to fund Canadian content isn't realistic. So the proposal that funding obligation be spread across a wider base makes a lot of sense to us. It helps fund content. It brings into the system contributions from players that are benefiting from the distribution of audio and visual content, so it makes sense. And when people talk about it as a Netflix tax, maybe I read a different report, but I'm not so sure that the Commission, at least, is proposing that the Netflixes of the world contribute to that. I think they're saying that there are different categories of service providers, and they should be required to contribute to the system in some fashion, and that can take one of many forms. It could take the form of content promotion. It could take the form of helping discoverability of Canadian content. So I actually think the Commission took a well-reasoned, holistic approach to a problem we're all confronting.
Dave?
Talked about a lot of concepts here. I would agree with Rob. We think this is a useful report. A wealth of information, a wealth of opportunities and risks, and then the various options. But just to clarify, so we've spoken about Netflix tax, we've spoken about the HST. I don't think there's any debate up in this panel that the long list of companies that you name should pay HST when they operate in this country and draw revenue from the country. Then there's the second component of this that comes under the general framework or wording of tax, and that is the contribution in support of Canadian content. And that's the second aspect, and I think that's the more controversial one, and I think both Andy, Samar, and Ted have spoken against that. That's the position that Rogers has taken formally, and we think that that would place some burden on internet service. However, if you're in the shoes of the Commission and they are charged by legislation with supporting Canadian content. A major support of Canadian content has been the 5% levy on BDU revenues. Now, some of that goes to community channel and independent funds, but the remainder goes and is a foundational element of the leveraging of funds for the creation of Canadian content. It unlocks lots of tax credits, so on and so forth. Without a doubt, as Hammer said, the elephant in the room was the sales tax. I would say the elephant in the room actually was the OTTs drawing audiences from BDUs. And I think this report is probably the first one that says, we're not going to pretend that the elephant isn't in the room, recognizes it is there, not quite sure what to do with it, have a variety of options. But one of those options would be, in terms of the funding, to recognize that BDU funding will be going down. I take your point. And we've used this argument before. Netflix came into Canada, et cetera, we had, I think, 1.7 million internet subscribers. That was 2010. We're at about 2.2 or 3 now. So there are lots of consumers who wanted internet, not to watch video. But that being said, video is consuming a lot of the bandwidth, is having great impact. Not to go on too long, but just to frame this, it's $220 million the Commission is talking about that comes from cable to fund the fund. You take that $220 million, you take it over the $40 billion of communications revenue from internet, wireless, et cetera, you are looking at a levy of about 0.5%, so 0.5%. Many of the pundits are out there saying the internet is going to die. People will be dropping off. We don't know what you mean by net revenue neutral. I think it is a modest impact, if you want to go that route. And as I say, put yourself in the shoes of the Commission. They are to support Canadian content. We may decide that this isn't the way you want to support it, and you can go another way. But just to try and calm some of the hysteria as to what the equivalent tax would be if it's spread over the broader base, that's roughly what it would be on the $40 billion. That's not an extremely distortionary tax. It's over the broadest base possible, et cetera. With that, I will stop there. There's actually a bigger concern I have that we'll talk about later.
You're talking about the social goals of the Broadcasting Act, which I'm sure neither Andy or Sammer's company, when they launched, never thought they'd have to satisfy.
No, that's true, but in terms of a competitive impact, it's neutral.
One of the things
you really
that
think it's neutral?
I don't believe it is.
Yeah, I don't believe it is either. One of the things is, imagine you're in a race, and we're coming in a bit late to the game. Roger's been around, longer than us. Bella's been around a lot longer, and we all have an unlimited amount of energy and unlimited amount of money, assuming, right, which is not the case. But let's even assume we were at the same level playing field that way. But because we're coming late to this marathon that never seems to end, we're always going to lose no matter what. So the only way, like, we're tackling a problem, in my perspective, that as a Canadian company, even if we have a BDU, we cannot do over the top. So we're already at a disadvantage compared to like a Netflix or whatever else service, Prime, Amazon Prime, whatever. The idea here is there's so many other rules to change. I'm perplexed that we're focusing on something so minuscule compared to the bigger picture, which is a lot of other issues to fix, and that's my opinion.
Which we're getting to.
Okay.
So, the way I would look at it is there is a competitive impact, or there is a cross-subsidy between companies that took a particular strategic approach towards content and differing approaches as between different companies. So there is a problem because apparently Canadians like Netflix a lot, and they like a lot of other online services, and content companies are suffering, traditional legacy content companies are suffering, and that somehow a company that has made a strategic decision not to have a BDU or like in our case, we have a BDU, but does not own content. We contribute. We contribute just like everyone else. But the pure programmers, we don't have a programming undertaking, and why my ISP business should subsidize or my wireless business, irrespective of how trivial the amount sounds when you do your 220 over 40 billion. That to me it makes no sense. I'm subsidizing a competitor who made apparently a poor strategic choice.
There's another part of this, like there's this attractive logic, I think, that companies that benefit from the growth in video content or content that used to be programming content ought to pay for it. But the way that we all pay for it, I think, is quite different. Like there are lots of industries that grow on the back of that, right? I assume the cables that run and support the internet services that we provide are not now going to have to pay into this, because now those are providing content that didn't before. So, okay, the cables aren't there. The Chromecast boxes and other sort of devices that carry over-the-top signals that used to be set-top boxes or built into TVs, those aren't going to be part of paying for it. So for some reason, the internet providers are included in the scope of who's benefiting from the growth in video.
Sorry, you're saying, so why not a portion or a percentage of my Kindle Fire Stick or my Chromecast? Why doesn't that go to part of the system?
I mean, I'm being hyperbolic. Like the reason it isn't is because we all know like that's not directly enough connected to it, or for some reason the Commission's report writes the internet service providers into like that we benefit enough from that growth. People have migrated from, I guess, other broadcast mediums onto internet consumption, that we're within the threshold of who ought to pay for it. But there's lots of other, if the simple logic is businesses that grow based on this growth or benefit from this growth should pay for it, it would apply to other people. So, but competitors, we pay already for growth as people migrate onto our networks. We directly pay for it. We buy capacity from carriers. As more people come onto our networks and consume more content, especially video content that uses a lot of bandwidth, we have to buy monthly more CBB.
Okay, so you benefited from that video moving to you guys, to TekSavvy, from people frustrated with the big companies. They want a better service, faster service, or something from TekSavvy. So you've benefited from that shift where they want to watch more video online through you. That's
right. I mean, we benefit from them coming over, and at the same time, they consume more content. As their habits change and they consume increasing amounts of content, which right now might be shifting toward video, or over the past few years have been shifting toward video, but I think we all know is increasingly shifting toward gaming, which is also extremely bandwidth intensive. And that will be network growth into the future. We have to buy more CBB. Even if we were stagnated in terms of customer growth, we would be directly paying for that increased consumption. And the people who we pay for that consumption are carriers who are not exclusively, but largely also vertically integrated. So again, they can take from that telecom pocket to the broadcasting.
Rob?
I was just going to say, I think this particular issue may be a little larger than our respective competitive squabbles over who pays for what. And, to Dave's point, I think the report is saying we want to preserve the existing amount of funding that's going into the system, which, if spread over a larger base, could be easily accomplished. And I think it's undeniable that all of us wearing our ISP hats or our wireless hats are benefiting from the dissemination of that content online. So again, I think it's a sensible approach to a problem we have to confront as an industry.
Maybe another way of doing it would be to make the CBC be your flag carrier of Canadian content and fund them appropriately for doing that, and remove Canadian content rules on the existing private players. Why not do that? If this is all about Canadian content, I don't see that. Why is that
I think we're going to fall into this vicious circle, though, of like, okay, if it moves like, tax it, if it keeps moving, regulate it, and then subsidize it, and let's tax it some more, and it's just a vicious circle that will never end. once again, why don't we just simplify life? You know, keep it simple, stupid.
Well, and life's about to get a bit more complicated. And what you said, Ted, maybe that could be part of your submission to this panel. It's going to be reviewing the Telecom Broadcasting and Radio Communication Act. So I wanted to pull today's news back into this now before we get to wireless and wholesale and other things near and dear to some of the panelists' hearts. But I wanted to talk about the review of the acts because you know, these are the foundational sort of documents that govern everything. And what today's release also said was that they wanted net neutrality to be the sort of the foundation of all of this, whatever it turns out to be, whether it's 1 act, still 3 acts, 2 acts, whatever, however they come to an agreement. So let's start there. For your purposes, what's network neutrality? I mean, there has to be a definition.
I'm sorry. The definition is in the Act. It has been in the Act for 100 years. It's Section 27 and Section 36. No unjust discrimination, no undue preference, and no messing around with content. It's been there forever, and like whatever the bill was that just passed, or the motion, or whatever it was that just passed in the House, it's simply a restatement of the existing statutory framework. You don't have to do anything. Canada has today amongst the most restrictive net neutrality kind of rules in the world. And that was all done under the auspices of Section 27 and 36. So, like, again, the KISS principle, like, you don't, like, it isn't necessary. Move on to something that's important. Like, there's a whole NAFTA thing going on, and, you know, there's tariffs flying around on steel and aluminum. Like, let's focus on things that matter.
You know, just going back to that, what amazed me is Videotron, for example, to bring up the example of what triggered, one of the things that triggered, they could have done exactly what they wanted to do by simply bundling it as a cost and not promote the data that went through the pipes to not count towards the pipes. So you want to give an $8 a month subscription to a Netflix if you buy, I don't see how that violates any net neutrality. But they would have achieved the same effect, right, without preferential treatment on the bits and bytes that go through the pipes, right? And once again, okay, you have the same effect at the end of the day. Why not just the KISS methodology once again, right? We seem to always want to overcomplicate things.
We do like to overcomplicate things. Anybody down
there? In effect, that's what we did with Spotify on our wireless, but well, I think it is a non-issue at the current time, given the regulatory treatment. It's quite clear from the current act, and it's quite clear from the differential pricing decision. I was thinking this morning, though, as I was listening to the 5G panel and the Internet of Things, and they talked about network slicing. So, and this was something that in the proceeding, the differential pricing proceeding, also known as a net neutrality decision, was really left to the side because it was viewed as a sort of a business relationship outside the normal consumption of bytes. But it's undeniable that in 5G world, when we have applications that require different latency, et cetera, there will have to be, I think, actually, not every byte will be treated the same. And that's certainly we're going to have to come to grips with as we move into the future world. Now, I think the way you can do that is bytes of a similar nature are treated the same. But clearly, if you're, I don't think we'll ever get to this, but remote operating on a person, I want that byte coming through fast and not getting slowed down. So just a complication and issue that will have to be dealt with in the future.
Yeah, and that's the premise of 5G. Like, it's going to be service-based, not necessarily, subscription-based. It's what service you need on that subscription. And we could easily implement a litmus test where it says if it's a life or death situation, like an autonomous car, well, and it's just a ranked system, a point system almost that we could implement.
But that's not the sort of thing that needs to be written into the acts, right?
No.
I would recommend you don't write it into the
basis.
act because it'll be too prescriptive. Because you can't, really don't know, well, you'd have to write it very flexibly because you don't know exactly what applications will be coming down in 15, 20, 25 years. You don't want to constrain yourself.
Well, and that's just it. It's the assumption that when the acts change, the government had a note today to go along with this. That's in some of the stories of me and other reporters, is that they will reject all proposals that increase what Canadians already pay. Okay, that's fine. It's not in the acts, but the CRTC will have to revise its policies to however the acts are changed. And in the policies, that's where sort of the rubber meets the road. That's where the nitty-gritty is.
See, what you want for a forward-looking document, to me, is something that states a higher principle, that provides flexibility. So to what Samar and Dave were saying, if you tried to codify whatever IoT is in 5 years, like, autonomous cars, we have a health business, there's going to be all kinds of sort of e-health type stuff that'll go on there. In every sector of the economy, there will be all of these various things. And if you go through and try and codify in advance, and frankly, with the greatest of respect, having been one myself, sitting as a bureaucrat in Ottawa and trying to codify what the future looks like, that is not what you should be doing. Like, if there is some role for any of this, as I just go back to, it's all there. It's in Section 27. You have the ultimate discretion to allow certain things and to not allow other things, and let them do their work.
But just to that point, with like Dave's and Ted's point, while I agree with that, the biggest challenge with smaller operators like us and the TekSavvy's is we always face an issue after the fact where the incumbents have a dominant market force, and if it's not spelt out somehow, it does hurt us. And we've seen it before with tower sharing, for example, right? It wasn't codified, and it shouldn't have been codified. But it's that spirit of the deal of maybe the incumbents should act like Big Brother in a way and help us, not, shut us out, sort of thing. So while I agree that it should never be codified, but the landscape here has made us almost like fear not for it to be codified.
I'm a little afraid.
We're moving away from net neutrality, though. But anyway,
I'm a little afraid of when you think about codifying, what bits are more important than other bits traveling over the network. And then I think in the Broadcasting Act, there's codified sections of Canadian of what content is. Drama, sports, comedy, ABC. There's a bunch of different. Are we going to see policy that decides what bytes are more important and rank them and number them and letter them?
Well, it was called the Maple system in broadcasting or in the radio.
I think you could codify the principle of net neutrality in a new Telecommunications Act if that made the proponents of net neutrality feel like there was some statutory objective. Certainly that could be done in Section 7 of the Telecom Act, but I think Ted and Dave and Sam we're all in violent agreement that the existing regulatory toolkit of looking at what's a net neutrality violation on a case-by-case basis based on a real-life use case makes perfect sense. Yeah. But codifying the principle, sure.
I think you could
defining it properly, sure, but regulate on a use case basis.
That would be the least harmful way of doing it, even though it's completely unnecessary.
But Ted, to your point, you said what's that got to do with net neutrality? It has a lot, because we're going to be riding on your network one day if we don't build our own, right? So it's all intertwined, unfortunately.
Andy, you had something?
I'd add my voice to that. Like the Act has been really robust and stood the test of time, and common carriage as the principle, as the rule that's in there, and undue preference and unjust discrimination, like those have supported network neutrality in the network. So I think it's been very effective, and if you wanted to codify network neutrality, I would encourage it more as a description of a characteristic, as a property of the network, than as a rule, right? I think common carriage is the rule, it's the principle that gives rise to a network that has the characteristic of being neutral. That's why sometimes it's hard to, I think of net neutrality as a rule that's there.
Okay. Any questions of the audience yet? No one? Anyone? I'll keep looking. While all this is going on, the Competition Bureau is undertaking a study of the broadband market. That was a bit of a surprise to me, kind of, I don't know, stepping on CRTC toes, I guess, but maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise. But they want to identify positive steps that regulators or policymakers could take to further support competition among broadband providers. There's 4 different things they're looking at: whether or not resellers can deploy competitive services properly right now, the consumer reaction to those competitive services, impact of existing regulation on broadband providers, and lessons they can learn from other countries. So let's say, Andy, you go first. What do you want to tell the Competition Bureau, and why?
I want to tell the Competition Bureau everything, and I'm very, we're excited that the scope of this is large enough that they can hear a whole story, right? One of the problems with CRTC proceedings that look at particular sectors or particular services is that they only view it in that context and they don't see a larger picture. Competitive internet services are really under threat from lots of different directions in Canada. And a market study from the Competition Bureau will have the scope to hear that and to see all the different parts of that story and how they fit together for companies like ours. Now, what will come from it, that we don't know. There's no assurances. It certainly is not part of a proceeding. We're not expecting orders or anything out of it. Trying to have reasonable expectations of it, but in terms of what we can feed into it, I'm really looking forward to being able to tell the whole story of a competitor's experience.
But are there any specifics that you're going to be diving into to say, look, there's been, like, I've seen it, I've written about it, there's been, from your point of view, abuses of market power, that type of thing. What really do you want the Competition Bureau to help you out with? What are these guys, what are the men beside you, their companies, what are
my complaints about each of these guys? Look, as a wholesale-based provider, we are supposed to have the same services, right? In the tariffs, we're supposed to have the same services that the carriers provide to their retail side. But then in every aspect of how we get those services, we get worse terms. It's written right into often in the tariffs or in guideline documents or in TPIA arrangements or in portals. There are huge obstacles to functioning as a competitive provider.
So worse terms like cost, speed, capacity?
Oh yeah, look, each of these carriers and all the other carriers that we operate on, we're on 7 underlying carriers right now doing wholesale network access. I think 7. And we're operating in every province in Canada now. Every one of them operates a different interface of some kind for us to place orders or do troubleshooting. They range from exchanging emails, literally, customers call us, they want an order, we send an email to the carrier to ask if there are dates available. We have to ask for dates that are 5 days out. So that's why you can't get a next day install from TekSavvy generally, unless we've figured something out in order to do that. That's all written right in the rules. Our customers tell us every day, I can call Bell or call Rogers and get a next day install. Why can't I get it from you? Well, the rules say we can't even ask for it 5 days out, and they're actually 10 days behind in processing our orders. So I'll ask for a date 14 days out, and then I'll hear from them in 12 days that date's not available. So I'm back to the customer to ask for. Okay, this is like, it sounds petty, but it's actually a fundamental problem in what creates this really uneven playing field. And it's the kind of thing that's very hard to get the CRTC to hear.
So I see Rob fidgeting, Dave rolling his eyes, and Sandra smiling. So Dave, you go first.
Well, I'll go first, except they just spent, I think it is 2 years in a competitor quality of service proceeding, more than 2 years. So you had ample opportunity, every opportunity to state your case, and the decision has come out. So they did review all the facts. It's actually written in the tariff is that you are to get to the extent possible the same treatment as a retail customer, but of course it can't be the same, because We provide the service, and there's a middleman imposed between the service provider and the customer. So if there is a problem at a house, they contact you. But then you have to contact us. Then we say when we can go out there, you have to go and check with the person. But there's no way to avoid it because we can't speak directly to the customer because they're your customer. So it's tricky. And just to finish, not to belabor this, the Competition Bureau, we too are equally looking forward as you to providing the full story. And we think it'll be good. We have 25 wholesale providers, wireline internet providers on our network today. We have several 100,000, as you know, end users. So we look forward to telling the full story as well.
Hey, Rob, and then we'll go out to Rocky.
So just a couple of observations about the story. You know, if you look at the resale market, I think there's 550 resellers operating. So what's that say to me? It says to me there's no barriers to entry. So it's a business that anyone can get in. If there's 550 of them, they must be doing something right. Or they wouldn't be in business. In what other business can you not have to expend capital on a network build? In what other business do you have price guarantees in the form of wholesale pricing? In what other business do you have guaranteed access to someone else's network? So, you know, when I look at the broadband study the Bureau wants to conduct, it's a bit of a head scratcher in the sense that it seems to start from the presumption or the assumption that the resellers need some form of assistance to be competitive. From where we sit, they're very competitive, and they have some inherent regulatory advantages that helps them continue to be competitive. I think they have a 30% cost advantage, or their prices are generally 30% lower. Well, why is that? They're the beneficiaries of regulatory largesse in the sense that guaranteed access to a network and regulated pricing. So, like Dave, we too look forward to telling the full story of how the resale market interacts with the facilities-based market. And if, to the extent that you're having issues with accessing our network on terms that you like, not to sound flippant, but one answer is expend some capital and build some network infrastructure.
I really have to take issue with this.
Okay, I thought you might. Your boss is at the microphone too.
I know, and I'm sure he will also want to take issue with this.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just addressing this whole thing about, the middleman and passing it on, that's why we can't do stuff. So what? Get the customer online. Just do it. What's wrong with that? That's what you guys do. Get the damn customer online. It's just that simple. The customer doesn't care. Get them online.
Actually, so.
I may not understand your point there, actually, if you could clarify a bit more. You mean
look, what
customer online?
I mean,
what part of sign up the customer and get the customer online when they sign up? Don't you understand? Like, the customer signs up, says, hey, I want to get online. You guys sign them up, you get them online same day, next day. What's wrong? Why can't you get our customers online same day, next day? It's really straightforward. Just get them online. That's the target. Just go.
It's not quite that simple because we're having to get them online. It depends whether it's a hot connection, cold connection, etc. We do get them online. You have hundreds of thousands of customers online.
Look, to the point about resellers, we're not resellers, right? We're not resellers.
Well,
we spend.
The Competition Bureau is calling you resellers.
I mean, and we will explain to the Competition Bureau why we're not. There are such a thing as resellers, and for business purposes, we sometimes have agreements where we do resell, another carrier's internet service. We're wholesale network access-based providers. We buy the last mile service that goes back to a point of interconnection, and then we invest a lot of money to build a network the size of TekSavvy's network, to bring backhaul to our own equipment where we have internet, at internet exchanges. We backhaul that traffic across Canada, not across the internet, but across networks that we build. And we've spent millions and millions of dollars to do that. No, now those aren't telecom facilities, I understand, but they are the investment that a company like ours makes to provide those kinds of services. And when carriers work well with us, we can actually do the kinds of services that you were saying that you can't do. We can, when we've managed to negotiate it with carriers, directly access information from their own databases in order to sign up customers, select technician availability days, and get customers signed up and installed right away. The reason it's not available, perhaps, on your network, which it's not, is because we don't have access to that kind of information. Instead, we have to make requests that are then processed on your side, and that leads to delays. We could work together more closely to provide those services so we level that playing field, or the commission could require that to happen. That has not happened yet, and I don't think that anyone has seen that whole story being told.
So I know Samer wants to jump in. He's been holding it in, and then Ted too.
No, I couldn't agree more with Andy, actually. It's the same pain points where there's no incentive from the incumbent to provide us access, whether it's the APIs. I mean, we had to beg for APIs to just access the system. Literally, somebody has to go in. So just to integrate to our back end, so there's some, let's say, some sort of automation doesn't exist. Dave mentioned a point about, the proceeding, right? Why didn't we voice our opinion in the proceeding, right? Like the public proceeding or the internet, yeah. The problem there is, as a small company, we don't even have an in-house legal counsel, right? So for us to go through a long process to voice our opinion, things do get missed. Yes, we're not perfect, but it's different having 5 set of eyes where a larger company like a Rogers will have 5 lawyers looking at this versus us with our, not in-house counsel looking at it. It's completely like the playing field is not level by any means. And once again, which I mentioned earlier, the spirit of the deal isn't there. Are we really onboarding a client, like the gentleman there said, or are we not? We want to onboard a client. Why does it have to be so complicated?
Well, yeah, so to Mark's point, I'll tell us, Dave and Rob, let's say it takes 2 weeks to make the change. Why can't it be 5 days? Just, rather, let's not go same day, which is what you all offer. Why can't it be less than that?
Well, it is less than that. It's not 2 weeks. There are standards that have been put in place, and it's much less than the 14 days, but not in all cases. Because if you want your install on a Thursday night between 7 and 9, it may take you a couple of weeks. And you miss one, it takes another couple of weeks. There are very specific circumstances that affect a certain number of installs. The point when I raised my hand there on to Andy's point on spending millions and millions of dollars on network, just because this really is the fundamental point. So I checked the communications monitoring report, came out last fall. So $11.6 billion of investment spent across the communications networks in Canada. 30 million was spent by the alternative, I don't want to call them resellers, you took offense at that, call them the ISPs, the independent ISPs. So $30 million was the capital expenditure collectively.
We pay good money in all of the rates that are costed out to the CBB for all the facilities that we use on your networks. Nobody's freeloading for any services here. So I totally understand that you make huge investments way beyond what we invest in hardware and equipment. Those get costed into the rates that we pay for, over amortized over years. That's true for the aggregated. It's going to be true for disaggregated fiber, where the rates are far too high already. And we're looking to the CRTC to make sure that those are adjusted. But nobody's freeloading on the investments that you're making in infrastructure.
No, that wasn't really the point I was making. The point I was making, you're saying that you actually invested in CapEx yourself. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Well, we do invest in I was responding to Rob's point that that we are reselling services. We have this reliable network that we haven't invested anything in, and we're just reselling, some internet connection at a lower price. It's simply not true. We're backhauling customers' traffic to our own network across, an incumbent network using regulated rates, and then we bring it on our own network that we have built or paid for to our own internet services, where we have our own, caching equipment and switches if we're doing telecom and all that or telco, all that stuff, and then do our own internet exchange. We transit it across the country. We spend a lot of money and a lot of effort to build those networks. We're not simply reselling incumbent services.
Another question.
I just quantified it.
Yeah, look, we're making CapEx investments. We have data center, we have a plant in Madoc, we're laying fiber in Chatham. We're investing in TV. We the network, so we're doing all these things. But of course, it's not on the scale of what a Rogers can do. That's normal, natural. That's exactly the point. But we're paying for everything that we're using. Now, all of that is kind of moot. We have customers in the millions, right, across the board. We have hundreds of thousands that want decent access to decent services, and they call up and they say, hey, can I get X, Y, and Z? And they want it. It's sort of like, I don't care who's in the middle. I don't care this. I don't care about that. Get her done. You guys are the guys that do this stuff. Why does it take 7 days? Why does it take 4 days? Yeah, of course I want it at night. I'm working in the day. Of course I want it at night. You're staffing wrong. Why don't you have staff when you need it?
Is he running our businesses?
The point is, whatever it is that's needed, that's the target. Get her done. That's what we do. The customer doesn't care. They want to get online. They want it done.
Ted?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess if you want to come and run our tech service crew, that's fine. But
sure.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? That's the point, isn't it, Rocky? That's the point. Broadly speaking, however, keeping up with the theme of unnecessary, and I know Greg Glang is in the room, this report actually somewhat baffles me. I was looking at the CAGR on growth of revenues and subscribers in that category of other alternative ISPs or whatever you want to call it. And between 2012 and 2017, it was 13.2%. They grew from about 1 million to about 1.5, about 1 million to 1.5 million over that span. That does not strike me as being a problem. Now, some of the things that Andy and Rocky's is more simple. It's a more focused concern around CQOS, I guess.
I got his name wrong. So that's Mark.
Or Mark, sorry, Mark. But yeah, you interrupted me now.
Sorry. Stupid moderator.
Oh, but since I've been in this business since 1992, not a week has gone by where I haven't heard a complaint in a regulatory proceeding from a wholesaler. It costs too much, takes too long. We want it aggregated. No, we want it disaggregated. We want this, that. We want deeper unbundling. We want access to this. We want access to that. At some point, and it's just the same litany from people. And, without having your own facilities and your own infrastructure, I appreciate you're smaller. You don't have the scale. But you are growing. Canadians are attracted to your services. This framework exists for getting access to them. And is everything perfect? No. I guess same-day installation is a problem. But
that's part of it. I mean, Samer, you're not going to build a national network. Andy, you're not going to build a national network. That's just not going to happen. Nobody's going to overbuild and have a new facilities based coast to coast wherever they need to be. But the government has said there has to be competition. And these are the ways to do it. These
Nobody
other small guys
nobody
filling
has
it
a
in.
national internet
Okay, well,
network.
big regional, whatever it might be. You know, Andy's not going to rewire all of Ontario. Samer's not going to put wireless all across Alberta. Whatever. So, is part of this discussion then re-looking at what facilities-based actually means? You know, do we talk about software and virtual networks as being facilities-based?
So Greg, I have just a question before we, because you asked Andy, what would you ask the Competition Bureau? And one question I have for them is, how come they only did broadband? What happened to, why is broadband one, like what happened to wireless? What happened to 5G? What happened to a lot of other stuff that we know we're having issues with?
Yeah.
So to me, that's the question, is why are we focused once again? We're pigeonholing ourselves. And then to Ted's point, why, you know, the regulator maybe seems to understand that one size will fit all. That cannot happen in Canada because every geography is different. I can attest to that being up in northern Canada in the Arctic. Nothing there looks like anywhere else in Canada. And one size does not fit all. So if we want aggregated versus disaggregated, why can't both be available? And let us choose. Put a tariff on this, put a tariff on that. Let us choose. Why are we removing one to put for the other? Because 5 out of 6 guys say, well, we want aggregated. Well, guess what? What if Iristel wants disaggregated and 5 others like Iristel want disaggregated? To me, this is, once again, it's part of the bigger problem of, yeah, what does it really mean of facilities? Like, facilities could be anything today. They're all software defined.
Do we need to change that definition? Dave, Rob?
I think it's fairly clear what facilities are. It is defined as a transmission facility, narrowly defined in terms of perform ownership requirements. But I think facilities are the stuff on the ground and the stuff in the air, the towers, radios, the fiber. It's not really, I think you're missing the point if you think it is the software definitions in the boxes. The majority of the cost is in the actual physical infrastructure.
To my knowledge, the long and short of that is the facilities-based definition does not need to be changed. And when you actually dig into these definitions, either in the Radiocom Act or the Telecom Act or whatever, it's all about the transmission of intelligence at its core. Whether you do that over 2 tin cans and a string, a piece of fiber, or in some software-defined way, to me is irrelevant.
Well, except to your point, Ted, you either need the string between the 2 cans or the fiber. You can't, the software defined, it can't operate without the actual network
I
and
agree.
the physical or through the air, through the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes,
what drives what then? Because if we don't have a Netflix, you wouldn't have had to increase your network, so then you wouldn't have had to build facilities, but then it's the software guys that made you build the facilities. So, if we look at it, great, this works very well in year 2000, but 20 years from now, this is not gonna jive, right? Like, to me, that is very confusing.
I think you're still either going to have fiber or you're going to have radio spectrum. You've got to get from point A to point B, and I don't know, maybe there are other ways, but those are the only 2 ways I know right now.
I mean, my concern more than the definition of facilities is the emphasis on facilities-based investment. I mean, the policy direction to emphasize facilities-based investment, I think, is, I mean, it's really problematic for us. Yeah.
That's another way of saying it drives prices, wholesale prices up.
Look,
Let's go to the floor.
Good afternoon. My curiosity is a little bit on the periphery of our current conversation. Samer gave me a bit of a segue on it. Our country is vast. Our geographies are quite distinct. I'm thinking specifically about Northern Ontario, where the network of networks is probably not as well developed. Backhauls are not as capable. And we do have, from 18 months or so ago, the ruling from CRTC about newer targets for download and upload. There are segments of the networks that I have to deal with day to day that are not even close to the old 5 megabits that we tried to do for download. There's a roadmap that kind of says 90% of our country will likely have by 2021 those as a baseline. I suspect that we're pretty well there today. What about the next thereafter? Does anybody have an opinion or an idea of how that will be addressed for those areas that today don't see where the roadmap is going for achieving those types of targets?
I mean, I think and I'm alive to this, to the concern that you have. Today, around 84% of Canadians have available to them, or as of last year, 50 megabits. And that'll continue to grow. We're about halfway through our fiber build, and Bell's in the middle of a fiber build. Rogers and Shaw and everybody, all the cable folks are doing DOCSIS 3.1 and all of this good stuff. So that will grow. How it will, in terms of more rural areas or even remote areas, that's where government funding is going to be required. And that's where I assume the minister, when he speaks tomorrow, will talk about the Connecting to Innovate program, the prior Connecting Canadians program. I think a fair question, sir, is whether enough money has been given to that. And you raised a couple of interesting issues to me because, not only are your access speeds not there, but your backhaul isn't there. And it was an interesting sort of way, and that probably is an issue. Well, it's an issue for everybody, but it's got to be an issue for you in the north. And the transport. The specific focus of the Connecting to Innovate program on transport funding, I would hope that with the CRTC, when it gets around to the $750 million, that it's going to collect kind of hues close to what the government programs have set out. They moved from last mile to transport and that kind of thing. Anyway.
Yeah, if I could add to that. So one of the biggest problems I think that we have is we do not have a national broadband policy to address that. Okay, and that's, I think, the crux of the issue, because you know what, we have great programs, but they're all disconnected and they are not unified whatsoever. And there's never enough money, as Sted mentioned, because you're going to throw $100 million at something and $100 million at something else that's not connected. You've just probably wasted 30% of that in overhead that you could have saved otherwise, right? So I think that's something that needs to be addressed, because every other country that is in the G7 has a national broadband policy from 10 years ago, at least, and we're still here without one.
All right, thank you. And I guess what happens as well is that a lot of this infrastructure was built on more legacy copper, not even coaxial. So the technologies of the day, which are mostly DSL-based, don't have a roadmap to even achieve those speeds. And I guess in part, we are serviced by subsidiaries of BCE. I'd be curious if you have an opinion as to if there's an internal roadmap that kind of identifies how that next may occur, or if you're just taking a wait-and-see approach after 2021 to see what legislation may come in to bridge that gap as far as a directive.
One thing that I could add to that is we are taking initiative as Iristel, through Kepler. So I'm one of the co-founders of Kepler. We launched our first satellite low Earth orbit. That's every little spacecraft, which is the size of a loaf of bread, basically, is capable of delivering 400 megabits per second, which is our Gen 1. Our Generation 2 is going to be in the gigabits per second per satellite. So hopefully, and this is low Earth orbit, so you could handle 5G. There's no latency. So hopefully there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we need more support from the Canadian government for sure. And yeah.
Just on, obviously copper-based technologies are capable of doing 50 megabits per second, but probably not in the areas that you're referring to.
Yeah, we have distance issues.
Your distance issues.
Kilometers.
Yeah, so, I mean, who knows, in terms of the Connecting to Innovate program and the Connecting Canadians, I can speak from our experience. Where we were most successful was not even dealing with copper. We went directly to fiber. And the government was interested in fiber, obviously. So that's, you know, part of the solution. I think the satellite thing is another huge part of the solution, because in a lot of these areas, because frankly, for whatever reason, I believe there's a feeling within certain circles of the government that satellite just isn't an appropriate technology. And I think they need to get over that, because that is going to change sooner than they think as well. And that could solve a lot of problems for these rural or more rural and remote areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your opinions. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your question. The mics are still open if anybody else has some more questions, but let's switch over to wireless for now. What I've called the skinny wireless in print. You know, the federal government's CRTC mandated low-cost, data-only wireless options. I'll tell you personally, I was surprised that when the options were made public by TELUS, Rogers, and Bell, that it wasn't at least 1 gig. I had that in my head as kind of a stepping off point for these low-cost plans. I don't know why. It just seems consumer friendly, I guess, and just, you know, something you could market, I suppose. But the responses to these programs are now due June 13th. So, Samer, I'm going to go to you first. What are you going to tell the Commission June 13th?
Did you notice my shirt, by the way?
I think it says Sugar Mobile.
It says Part 1 Sugar Mobile.
There must be a Part 2.
There must be. We're waiting for that. So, I mean, I think it was more of a, in my opinion, it's more of a bone that the CRTC threw back to the feds to say, okay, we're doing something. Here it is. It's more of a stopgap than a fix, in my opinion. But it's very apparent that I think what like the feds and the CRTC, it's almost like we're diverging paths right now, and they're not aligned as to what each one wants, maybe. So, you know, the plans were a bit of a joke, in my opinion. They came back, and there was nothing there that didn't exist already. So I'm hoping June 13 would be a better result, you know, but I'm not hopeful based on my experience, but yeah.
So, Rob, you just said your plan's a bit of a joke?
Yeah, I heard that. You know, not surprisingly, we wouldn't agree with that, but, you know, I think the Commission, in asking us to come forward with data-only plans, again, made a sensible decision and looked at the state of the market. It looked at the impact that MVNOs or Wi-Fi first providers or public Wi-Fi definitions could have on investment, and it said, you know, rather than undermining facilities-based investment, let's look at a perceived gap in the market and ask the carriers to come up with something. So, you know, we came up with something that we thought wasn't a joke and that addressed the gap in the market. The other carriers did the same thing. You know, and the other thing that gets forgotten here is there's a bunch of regional facilities-based wireless providers that are just coming into the game and are having an impact on the market. And, you know, an MVNO policy or a Wi-Fi first policy, again, is going to undermine that level of investment that is just becoming very meaningful and very competitive in the marketplace. So don't think our plans were a joke. Think they addressed a need in the market, and, you know, we're happy to debate them as we go through the process.
I mean, I agree entirely with Rob. Let's go back to what happened here. So there was an order in council that said, look at plans that would access the macro networks, but be Wi-Fi primarily. So I think a gig is just a nice number in your head, but if you sort of think about that, if the purpose of this is for incidental macro access, so use the use case of a child who spends their day at school where there's Wi-Fi, or whatever, as in their house where there's Wi-Fi, but has to walk from there to a school bus stop or walk home from school. That's what those plans were designed to do. And that is the exact use case that we were provided with. So to me, we all didn't have those plans. Like on Koodo, we didn't have that plan. On public mobile, we had data-only plans. But like there are new plans there. And it's like for less than a cup of coffee a day, you get 600 megabytes. I don't think that's worthy of the derision that we have been faced with about it.
Some of the derision is coming from consumers themselves. So last night I had a look at the submissions so far. None of them appear to be form letters, which is interesting, but there's over 580 right now that look to be mostly from individual consumers. Most are angry with the plans and with the wireless providers in general, calling for industry reform and lower prices, and those were the nice ones. A lot of them agree with Samer. So a lot of Canadians aren't hearing your messages. So, how do you turn around this perception problem? Is it a perception problem? Is it a real problem? I know Samer thinks it's a real problem, not a perception problem. I think Andy thinks the same thing.
It's a bigger competition problem than that. We want to compete. We don't have a mobile service right now. Customers ask for it, and we can't provide a bundle right now. If we were going to get into the mobile market, the reason that competition among incumbents, even if you end up with 4 players, more or less nationally, who do compete with each other and compete with each other for pricing, they're only incumbents, right? They're only the incumbents. And the rest of us who do competition on the wireline side and increasingly on IPTV can't get into that mobile space. We lose customers to incumbents. There's no reason why that needs to be true. You can create a competitive market that operates, similarly to wholesale. It's MVNO, or it uses roaming rates, or something else that lets us have customers across all of the kinds of services that customers want. Making customers sign up for incumbent-provided data service in order to get on the network and then get, a TekSavvy mobile service, that answers a question that nobody was asking. Like, I understand that the CRTC asked, this is another variation of what Ted was saying earlier, that the CRTC was asked a question and provided an answer on the TV side. The CRTC asked them to provide rates for a skinny data plan, and I guess they have. We just don't see that as something that consumers want. Consumers are going to walk into a Rogers store and get a skinny Rogers plan. I think we all know that most of them will get upsold to a Rogers plan and not have to end up on a competitor at all.
Well, I think if I could interject just that this was to be aimed, as Ted said, at the Wi-Fi first customer. This is the principal driver of it, was to aim at the, not to be pejorative at all, but the lower end of the market, and we certainly have done that. If you look at the offers the 3 of us have put out, we came in slightly less. We thought in terms of dollar cost, we thought the emphasis was on low cost. These plans are very comparable to a lot of the suppliers in the United States, the disruptors who are focusing Wi-Fi first. There are lots of them, anywhere ranging from 200 megabytes to 500 megabytes for, when you convert it to Canadian dollars, between $20 and $30. These are very comparable plans in many respects. We at Rogers, if you don't want data only, you can come and get a $25 plan that will get you voice, text, and 100 megabytes of data. So there is variety. In terms of the perception, that is a very important point. We wrestle with this all the time. I mentioned $11.6 billion in investment from the facilities-based providers in 1 year. Think of that over 10 years, over $100 billion. So I think everybody wants something for a lower price, but there's a cost to these services, both wireline and wireless. Why is it? I think in some respects you think, well, internet, you think, well, one more byte doesn't cost anything. It just disappears somewhere. And it's true, one bite doesn't, but as you add the trillions, there is a cost. And same with the wireless world. And conversely, I think people don't realize the cost of providing the service, but they should, because they also then complain about, well, I don't want a cell tower in my backyard, and I don't want you digging up the streets all the time. So it's like, people, I don't think they see the cost of providing the service, yet they actually do see some of the symptoms of that cost. I'm not sure how you deal with the perception.
You mentioned something, though, that got my attention. You said in the U.S. So, okay, let's compare ourselves to the U.S. And if we are going to do so, then let's just look at one stat. There's over 250 MVNOs in the U.S. There's 0 that are independently owned here in Canada. Okay?
That's not quite right.
I'm off by 1 or 2, sorry. Maybe there's 1 or 2. Okay, all right. But it's not independently owned by one of the incumbents. I mean, like a PC Choice or something, that I don't count that as an MVNO.
7-Eleven? You don't count Star?
That's a reseller, though. Those are resellers. They're not an MVNO. They don't own facilities, any type of facilities.
Okay, so you're narrowing the definition.
I'm narrowing it down.
Okay. Don't own facilities.
So, yeah. But the point is, if in the U.S., if you're comparing your pricing to the U.S., then there's 250 choices. If a company chooses to increase their price to $30, that's their choice. They're going to lose market share. If they're really good at marketing, they can still grab the customer. There's 249 others to choose from. Here, there is no choice. Big difference. So if we're going to compare, let's compare apples to apples, not apples to bananas.
There's also 360 million people in the United States. There's 35 million here.
And the same plan
so
that costs $65 here costs $30 there.
And it's a very different market.
100%. But why did it get there while we're still struggling talking about how many proceedings did it take, and we're still back to square one?
I don't know. We have 35 million people. We have the second largest country in the world. You just finished telling me how hard it is to build in the topographies of northern Canada. Like, I mean, there's a million reasons.
Sure, but it doesn't justify the rates. And it doesn't. And if you're so sure that you've already built this network, well, let's get open access.
I would say that the problem, or the answer to your question about perception, is the same perception that Canadians have about lots of things. And if you look at any network industry, be it airlines, be it rail lines and cargo rates, freight rates by railroads to farmers, all of that, gasoline networks, Canadians love to complain about the price of all of it.
But what do they all have in common?
And they're all networks.
They're all oligopolies.
And they're all, for the love of God.
It's all oligopolies.
Like, okay, well, we need 25 competitors. Is that what you're going to say?
Well, okay, so I was in Mongolia. I just got back from Mongolia a few months back.
Oh, come on, you can't
Let's just compare
Mongolia to Canada.
But I'm going to take an extreme case. Fair is fair.
Yeah,
right?
I think you're making an extreme
Let's
case.
look at Mongolia for a sec. 3 million people.
After this, we're going to go to John Lawford in the back.
3 million people. You know how much it costs there? 3 million people on a landmass that's as big, like almost the size of Canada. Well, not quite, but you guys get it. 3 million. So 1/10 what we have. The ARPU there is $3. $3.
What's a house cost in Mongolia? What's a bowl of rice cost in Mongolia? It's like, these are irrelevant.
Okay.
Like,
no, because you're talking about size. I'm comparing size, right?
I could go to Myanmar and buy, like, you know.
No, but we can't keep saying mine is bigger. Like, you can't keep saying that, right? Mine is not, you know, like.
Well, it is.
Okay, well, if it's bigger, well, somebody's going to be bigger that's going to come from the south and invade us. If we don't collaborate as
They can do that today. Why don't they?
Why isn't, okay. No, they cannot, because
can't.
the Telecom Act specifies foreign ownership.
Wrong.
Foreign ownership
You can
rules.
buy anybody under 10% national revenue share.
And then what happens when you grow over that?
If you organically grow, nothing. Okay. If you do it by acquisition, that might be a different thing.
Let's go out to John Lawford. He's at PIAC. He's got his finger on the pulse of Canadians.
He's going to break his wrist there, too. He's been holding that thing for like 20 minutes.
I wanted to turn things to, you said you were going to talk about the Telecom and the Broadcasting Act review, but before we get there, I want to hear your thoughts from everybody on why should Canadians trust you to reform both acts in the public interest, if you do things like block your own customers, you want to block your own customers' internet access to enforce your own copyrights, and the way you sell products to Canadians, which is the best I can call it is mis-selling. Why should we trust you guys?
Rob, maybe you should go first. That was a little bit about fair play too, so I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
Well, we're not, you're referring to the Fair Play Coalition, and certainly the proposal isn't that any ISP does the blocking to enforce that, other arm's copyright. The idea is a recognition that piracy is a significant problem in Canada and across the world. The evidence is overwhelming to show that. There's 2.5 billion visits to piracy sites in 2017. There are over 15% of Canadian households, or 2 million people, accessing content through piracy streams. And there are countries around the world who have recognized that if they want to have a copyright integrity in their ecosystem, that something needs to be done about it, because the piracy problem is anonymous, it's offshore, and it can't be rectified by existing laws. So, if you're referring to fair play, and you are, we think it's a sensible approach to a real problem that runs the risk of undermining our domestic ecosystem. So.
It's your customers who are doing that. So it's a trust thing. The way you speak to Canadians often comes off, from our point of view, as corporate interest first, and not even a head nod to the fact that, like I said, some of these pirates are folks that pay for your internet service. So it's just a more nuanced.
Well, what do you
John,
sorry.
Just interject that maybe piracy has an attractive appeal to it. Let's call it what it is. It's content theft.
It's copyright infringement.
It's stealing.
It's infringement.
No, it's stealing. It's theft. The content. And it's just not right.
Jails aren't big enough, Dave. Jails aren't big enough for everybody who's done that.
Well, John, how does the system work if rights are not maintained? We're talking about, earlier we started off talking about creation of Canadian content and the funding of. If you take it broader, who is going to create content if they're not compensated for it? This is not a big issue for Rogers in that sense, but look at ATN, look at the smaller the content producers. Who is going to create content if they're not compensated? So it's not a topic that should be taken lightly.
And what do you say to the small independent producer that has no remedy today, no effective remedy today? He or she can go to court on a one-off basis, try to get a blocking order. It might take a year, and it's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars. And how does that protect the ecosystem? It's not about Rogers and Bell. It's about independent content producers. If you look at the Fair Play Coalition, it's actually quite interesting to see how such a diverse group of industry stakeholders, who oftentimes are at odds on various issues, have come together and recognized a common problem. And the problem is, to Dave's point, you can call it copyright infringement, but at the end of the day, it's theft. If I walked into a grocery store and cleaned out the shelves of food, I'd be arrested on my way out.
But this is nothing new to us, right? Like, we've seen this before, and we dealt with it in the music industry was a perfect scenario where iTunes came and they started breaking up an album to songs to like $1 each, 99 cents. Guess what? Everybody's buying it because it's not worth going and copying that song illegally anymore, right? If we broke down content in terms of a pay-per-use sort of thing, I bet this problem would be eliminated overnight.
I couldn't disagree with you more. If you take a program like Letterkenny, Canadian-produced show, featured on Crave TV, you can buy the full library of Letterkenny for $7.99 a month, 31 cents an episode, and yet it's one of the most pirated shows. So the issue is not that consumers, the excuse isn't, well, it costs too much. The issue is if it's available for free through copyright infringing sources, some of which consumers may not recognize are illegal, people are going to prefer free over having to pay something. It's not an issue of cost.
But Rob, I think it hasn't been mature enough for us to make that claim while we're kind of going down a different path. Like, I think we got to be consistent with our objectives. So, for example, when Quebec wanted to introduce the lottery gaming issue, everybody freaked out saying, oh, how could Quebec do this? They don't have the right. We're not going to do that. Well, now that it's the other way around with the fair play, you want to block content. I think we just got to stabilize the baseline and then try to figure out and build that 10-story building. But let's agree on that foundation, because it seems like, oh, if it's good for the goose, it's not good for the gander. If it's not me being the, like, it doesn't work that way, right? Like, I think we got to stabilize. Okay, we said Quebec is out of their mind. Fine, then let's follow the same rule.
But that's not a question of legality and illegal content. That was a matter of principle. Should they be able to block that website? But when you're talking about
without
stealing
the
content,
of the CRTC, incidentally,
I think they're completely different circumstances.
I don't see it different. I'm sure maybe half the crowd will agree with you, half not. Who knows, right? But to me, it's...
Andy, you jump in here too, because I know TekSavvy was firmly against fair play.
Yeah, I mean, we're against that proposal. Like, this is copyright policy. It's not that it's simple, and I don't mean to downplay it. There are real issues about funding, small independent producers, and there's real issues about enforcing copyright. Like, these are real problems. These are like, if we start jumping in as the intermediaries who provide the networks, we start jumping in and trying to enforce, because of the traffic that's going across our networks, copyright policy, or in the same way cross-funding for independent producers, or other sort of ways of injecting the intermediaries into this stuff. Like, this isn't about telecom policy, and I think it's transparent that the reason that some parties are, particularly interested in this is because of their interests on the broadcasting side.
Well, it is about telecom policy. First of all, piracy is occurring on our telecommunications networks. That's where it's happening. Secondly, the expert regulator has a statutory mandate to authorize blocking. That's Section 36 of the Telecom Act. If you look around the world, other jurisdictions have done the same thing. It's an effective solution to a problem that can really only be stopped by blocking access at the source. And it's not the ISPs that are doing the blocking. It's an independent agency that makes recommendations to the regulator, and the regulator makes a decision in the public interest.
All of the same arguments could be made for any number of other illegal content, illegal sales, dark web, drug sales. We all can use our imaginations about illegal content on the network that our customers access. We know that. We could establish an independent body that proposed lists, and we were all required to block it. We don't do that, and that is network neutrality, right? Like, that's the nature of the network that we operate. The reason you're focused on copyright infringing websites is because it affects your bottom line on the other side of the business. Like, that, I think that's fairly transparent. That doesn't mean that it's unimportant. That doesn't mean that copyright infringement is unimportant. But we need to be consistent about, our role in operating the networks. Are we here to police the content that our subscribers use on the internet, or are we not? And then we need to be consistent about that. It's the bottom line that Samar was talking about.
Well, you say it's about net neutrality, but the last time I looked, net neutrality was about the free flow of legal content over the internet. Net neutrality isn't a shield for theft.
Well,
what we're talking about here is theft. There's an effective way of stopping theft. And should we sit idly by and just continue to let it to happen and erode the ecosystem of content creation? Well, we don't think so. 30 other like-minded people that are in that business and rely on it for their livelihood don't think so. The unions and guilds who are directors, who are key grips, who are producing shows for the benefit of Canadians don't think so.
So we're almost out of time, so let's go back to our sixth panelist, Mark, over there.
It's a blockbuster, so here I am. Look, I think all of this has to do with, people. The reason we're servicing all these things is because people want these services. content, whether it's internet, whether it's wireless. I'm addressing, my comment is to do with the perception, right? We're talking about the perception that exists out there, and here they are investing billions, and I think, it was sort of like, I'm not sure why that perception is so. My point is really to say that, look, it's really down to a choice. People want these things for a reason. Either we spend our time building these things to address those specific things, or we're addressing them focused on other things. And I think it boils down to a choice. Do we choose to address the things that consumers want or not? And of course there's consequences, but those other things ought to be scaled back or adjusted in order to suit what the consumers want. And that's really the point. It's a choice. We're choosing to focus on we spent 11 billion or we did this or we did that. But meanwhile, we still have the problem that I can't get my customer online next day. And here we are talking about next gen 911 and all sorts of other issues. We can't get past the very simple things, so it drags on and on.
All right, so anyone want to respond to Mark before we end? Because other Mark is up here and Mike is up to end.
I just have to say the rent is too damn high.
All right, well, thanks, gentlemen. Enlightening as always.
I'd just like to interject something. And Michael and I owe all of you an apology. And I'm sorry. We brought in speakers from the United States. There are speakers who came in from Europe. And I didn't realize that we should be looking to Mongolia for speakers. And I apologize, and I promise we will do better. Okay? But folks, thank you once again. It's been an hour and a half. I could have gone on listening for a while. I have a feeling between John Lawford and Mark Boudreau, they could have had questions to keep going for another hour. But I appreciate you helping us understand the issues. And folks, be careful if you've got your Cody boxes at home that you're going back to watch programs. But thanks very much. Hope everybody will be around tomorrow to hear what the minister has to say, and there's a number of other issues that we'll include in some further concluding remarks. But please join me in thanking the Regulatory Blockbuster and these folks for sharing.